With great excitement, I introduce you to Northwood University, a truly exceptional institution in American higher education. Since 1959, this private, accredited university has been a vibrant bastion of free thought and enterprise, standing out among the thousands of other schools in the U.S. Known as America's Free Enterprise University, Northwood is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of leaders who drive global social and economic progress. At the heart of Northwood lies the Northwood idea, a philosophy that celebrates individual freedom, responsibility, and the importance of moral law and free enterprise. This entrepreneurial spirit is evident in that 1/3 of Northwood alumni own businesses. Northwood is more than an institution. It's a movement that empowers students to think critically and champion liberty. It is a rare gem in today's academic world. If you're passionate about supporting a university that values intellectual growth and free enterprise, or to learn more about its academic programs, visit northwood.edu.
Hi, guys. I am back from Southern California, the promised land. Israel is not the promised land. Newport Beach is the promised land. Today, I've got a fantastic guest to kick off the new season. Batya Ungar-Sargon. Did I pronounce that right, Batya?
You sure did.
Is the deputy opinion editor at Newsweek. Newsweek also, we joked offline that maybe she doesn't want me to mention this, but she has a PhD in English literature from UC Berkeley. We need to talk about that. She is the author of 2 books. The earlier one was Bad News: How Woke Media is Undermining Democracy, right here. I got this at my alma mater at Cornell. And the recent book, the most recent one that came out just recently, Second Class: How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. Welcome, Batya. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like this is a long time coming. I've been admiring your work for so long, especially your work on how women spend more money during different phases of their menstrual cycle, which is so freaking true and no one will admit it.
By the way,
So thank you for having me.
thank you, Batya. Just to give you I mean, you would think that it's so obvious that human beings are affected by hormones, that consumers are biological beings, that in the exact same way that endless female mammals would be prone to these hormonal fluctuations depending on their reproductive status. When I tried to apply this to the work that you just kindly cited, I was a Nazi. How dare you argue that you... So that was actually my first exposure to all of these parasitic ideas, was in the pursuit of my scientific work, where apparently it was
Wow.
really controversial to argue that humans in
Wow.
general and consumers in particular are biological beings.
Wow, that is amazing. Yeah, it's so interesting to me. I've been thinking about this a lot, especially at the DNC, watching all of these women, someone like Hillary Clinton, for example, right, who will never need an abortion, let's say, okay, who would not have needed an abortion for the last 50 years, maybe less than that. But that is her number one issue. And there's this weird projection thing that happens when you reach a certain level of economic security in a country that has a big class divide, to where it becomes unbearable to you to admit that you are the beneficiary of inequality if you're a leftist or on the left. And so they create all of these alternative, kind of oppression envies, right? Where you have, let's say, white, progressive, affluent women who get conned by Robin DiAngelo into believing that America is still a white supremacy, right? Or who get conned into supporting trans women in women's sports, pummeling young girls, right? Because to me, I'm a real materialist, to me, this is all about the kind of economic security that the left has achieved and how that has warped their minds, because they simply will not admit that they are rich. So I'm sure that a lot of that was at stake in women saying, he will not publish the truth about how women spend money when they
Exactly.
are on their periods.
But by the way, speaking of those, I love your term. Did you call it professional envy? Is that what you called it?
I called
Or
it
what was the
I mean it's oppression envy
Oh,
is what
oppression
it is.
envy. So
Oppression envy,
I
yeah.
just responded to a tweet by Kamala Harris where it was some syrupy, girls can be anything they want and so on, as if she's saying this from Waziristan where the Taliban has refused little girls to go to school. And so I said I agreed, and I in my usual sarcastic way I said data from the US government shows that across every level of educational attainment at the university level, so associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, and doctoral degree, across the five most major racial groups. So there's basically it's a 4x5 cell. There are 20
Mhm.
different cells where you can calculate the ratio of men to women that have graduated in each of those cells. In 20 out of the 20 cells, Batya, women outnumber men. But the way that Kamala is speaking, it's, I mean, we need to allow women to enter universities because otherwise, I mean, we're not reaching our full
Right.
potential. So it's exactly what you said. It doesn't matter what the data shows. We're always going to, swim in an orgy of oppression.
Yeah, it's really upsetting because there is a real crisis in this country. There's a crisis afflicting men, young men. And it's so interesting how this kind of spiritual crisis has followed on the heels of the economic crisis. But precisely for the reason you just pointed out, this is a crisis afflicting men. Women are going to college. And in a country like America, where you have this enormous class divide based on whether you have a college degree or not, women are on the ascendant, and jobs that require brawn or physicality or machismo are the kinds of jobs that have been totally degraded by Democratic administration after Democratic administration after Democratic administration. So you started with NAFTA, which was Bill Clinton's baby, shipping a whole bunch of, and I'm talking 5 million very good working class jobs overseas to build up China and Mexico's middle class. So suddenly all of those men have no jobs. And then you had the sort of opening of the border and the welcoming in of millions and millions of low skilled workers to compete against the service industry jobs that remained here. And then you had President Obama, who defunded vocational training so that nobody now can become a plumber or an electrician or a welder, which are all jobs that ensure upward mobility into the middle class for working class men specifically, because they rely on brawn. And here's the kicker is it is not an accident that the discourse around toxic masculinity, to where being a man, a provider, having machismo, all that stuff that, by the way, women really like, right?
Yeah.
That we created this discourse to criminalize what it means to be a man in the symbolic areas of academia and the media and culture and every movie and every TV show, at the same time that the other hand was degrading their labor and making it impossible for them to support a family. Those things went hand in hand. The discourse, the symbolic discourse around toxic masculinity, was an alibi to justify the dispossession of the American male.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, to link what you just said about toxic masculinity to your doctoral dissertation, which was, I mean, not the specifics of your doctoral dissertation, but English literature. No, but I'm going to be serious for a second because I love how you preemptively start laughing before I
I
even
know.
because you yeah
So you're reminding me of the great sins of my youth.
the great sins of your year. That's right, youthful indiscretion of getting a PhD in English lit at UC Berkeley. But so in so I'm an evolutionary behavioral scientist, so I apply the evolutionary lens to all sorts of uh, areas of human import. And there is a field called Darwinian literary criticism, and I'll link it in a second to toxic masculinity. There is a field called Darwinian literary criticism where rather than analyzing literary texts using a feminist lens or a postmodernist lens or a Marxist lens, you actually use the evolutionary lens, the idea being that there are certain underlying universal themes that move us in literature, whether it's a Japanese novel or an ancient Greek poem or a Victorian novel, it doesn't matter. And those underlying universal themes are evolutionary based themes. It's paternity uncertainty, it's sibling rivalry, it's parent child a parent-offspring conflicts, it's sexual longing, and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to toxic masculinity, the best place that if you want to study what women fantasize about regarding their archetype of the ideal man, you should do a content analysis of romance novels, because romance novels are largely consumed by women, precisely. And as someone who studies consumer psychology, right? I mean, marketers understand human nature, whether they call themselves evolutionary psychologists or not, and therefore they're not going to create products that are going to fail in the marketplace. And if you do a content analysis of every single romance novel that's ever been written anywhere, it's the exact same male, right? He's a neurosurgeon. He's also a prince. He is tall. He is reckless and bold and brash, and he can only be tamed by the love of one good woman. He's got a six-pack, which he wrestles alligators on. I just described every single romance novel archetype of a male hero, and boy, is he oozing of toxic masculinity. So take it away, Batya. What do you think of that analysis?
Well, as a great consumer of romance novels,
Are you?
oh yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Listen, Shabbat in the summer is really long, okay? You need something to get you through that afternoon, because you can't watch any TV, you can't check Twitter, there's so much eating and drinking you can do with your friends, and then it's romance novel time. And yes, I read a lot of romance novels. I love them. And it's very, very true. In fact, I wrote an article about this once, that the romance industry elites were not happy with, because of course as an industry, I have to say, it is an incredibly feminist industry, because it is totally organized around the concept of female desire. And you're totally right, because it is part of a capitalistic marketplace, it is all about worshiping female desire, honoring it, respecting it, giving women what they want. And it turns out what they want is a strong man. And the truth is, though, it has evolved a little bit. Like, I'll read romance novels from the 70s, and part of the romance structure, of the fantasy structure of the female imagination at the time, was just full-on non-consensual rape. That was like a total staple of romance novels in the 70s. But by now that would never ever occur. Even, it's called dubcon, which means dubious consent. If you have a romance novel, there are a lot of them that have that. Women still totally get off on that, but they often have like a warning in the beginning, right, where there's this very playful relationship between the author and her readers, and the readers know which books to go to and which ones to but you're totally right, oozing toxic masculinity. And of course the flip side is, she is the only one who can bring out this sort of softer nature within him. But can I tell you that what you're saying about how there are narratives that we are programmed, I don't know if I would say biologically, but certainly culturally, to as humanity, to really be attracted to and love. I was thinking about that so much around the rescue of Noah Argamani, who was an Israeli hostage held by Hamas, who was rescued in this incredibly daring mission by a bunch of absolute heroes in the IDF. And I'll tell you why I was thinking about this. I was watching this footage of these men who were risking their lives because a beautiful, vulnerable, innocent woman, young woman, had been abducted by pure evil. And they were standing up and saying, "This is our job as men: is to risk our lives to save this woman." I mean, you could not have if you had written a movie about this, it would not have been good as the real life footage. You saw these men, these macho men, the most macho men on the planet, walking in. And when the guy saw her, and he's saying in his walkie-talkie, "Noah biadenu," which means Noah is in our hands, we have her. His voice cracks. He's this macho man he can't keep it together that they have her. And you hear them in their walkie-talkies, and you hear them talking to her as they're carrying her to take her, to rescue her. "Are you okay, Noah?" They get to the helicopter, they put her on, they says, "Are you okay, Noah?" Noah says, "I'm afraid." And he says to her, "Noah, we're so happy to have you. אנחנו כל כך גאים בך. We're so proud of you." I mean, it just gives you chills. Like, you could, and to me, so this is this is what anti-Semitism is. It's, you look at this footage, and you are able to overcome the programming that we as humans in 2024, that all humans in 2024 more or less have gotten, that this, we know who the hero in this movie is. We know who the villain is in this movie. And what does it mean to be an anti-Semite in 2024? You are able to overcome all of that programming so you can flip the switch and say, no, the ones who went to rescue her are the bad guys, and the ones who were protecting her, who had kidnapped her, they are the victims, right? It was such an amazing moment. I think this is what you're describing
Yeah.
about those narratives that we are bred on, and how those can get perverted by perverse ideologies.
So how did you, of course, I agree with everything that you said, and I've known a few of those Israeli guys. I mean, it seems like a good Jew is one that is quiet and meek, and that once the Jew is able to fight back, then suddenly, just by the sheer desire of wanting to survive, he becomes the oppressor, right? So even though he
Yeah.
engages in violence just to protect himself, that why are you being so smarmy, Jew? Why don't you just die in a dignified, quiet way? And by the way, I you may or may not know the story from this book right here, The Parasitic Mind. In chapter 1 of the book, I tell the story of, since we're talking about sort of macho combatants, one of my older brothers was a Olympian judoka, judo champion,
Yeah.
and he had won several Lebanese championships in a row, which the optics weren't nice, because it's quite shameful for a Jew to be winning in Lebanon all of these macho combatant sports. And so he was visited by some men who explained to him that it was time for him to retire, lest there might be an accident that happens to him,
Wow.
and he ended up leaving Lebanon. This was prior to the start of the Lebanese Civil War. He moved to France to pursue his career. So this, just the sheer idea. So the Jew is okay as long as he is ghettoized, and yes, we tolerate you until, of course, we decide not to tolerate you, in which case you better put on some really good sneakers and run fast. But for you to be macho, that doesn't go with our archetype of the Jew, and therefore, by definition, the IDF soldier becomes the evil Nazi.
100%. And I'm going to say something controversial now. I think that a lot of the discourse around Jews on campus is playing into that.
Yeah.
A lot of these Jewish students saying that they feel unsafe because a bunch of know-nothing they-thems are chanting things they don't like.
Right.
I'm sorry, but man up. Like, that is an insult to Jewish history. And
Right.
I just hate it. And Jews hate when I say this, because I think that, well, a lot of Jews in America, they go to university, they're very educated. It's a very educated group. American Jews, 60% of them have a college degree, which is, by the way, why so many of them are Democrats, because universities are Democrat producing machines.
There you
But
go.
I just hate this discourse that we're supposed to, the real victims of October 7th are, Harvard students who happen to be Zionists. I just hate that.
Yeah.
No, I refuse to accept that. That is not, it's 2024, and we are not trembling Jews anymore. And we're not afraid of this, and we're not afraid of that. We're not afraid of Hamas. And don't you dare be afraid of the they-thems who are out there, chanting and doing absolutely nothing. I mean, getting nothing done except to make Americans more Zionist.
Right. Well, by the way, that Star of David that you're wearing, you should try to wear that at my university or in Montreal and see how that goes for you. Can you believe?
I'm not afraid. I've worn it in Ramallah, and
Is that right?
yes,
Look
in
at
in Al
you.
Halil, and I've worn it in Nablus, and
That's amazing. So
I'm not
I was
afraid.
definitely not overstating the case when I was earlier on X in the last couple of days. I was posting who are some of the guests that I have coming up. All three happen to be female honey badgers. And if you know anything about the honey badger, it's the most fierce and ferocious animal. So I was definitely, I didn't know that story about you wearing the Star of David in Ramallah. So that's, you're definitely a honey badger. So, which leads me to my next question. So, and I'm not being facetious, I'm being very serious. So you had all of the trajectory that one would expect to be one of the really annoying progressive Jews, right? I mean, you're an American Jew. you have a PhD, you have a PhD in English literature, you have a PhD in English literature from UC Berkeley. So were you one of the really annoying Jews, or
Yeah.
and then you got out,
Yeah.
or all along you were anti-woke, but you just played the game?
No, I had a woke phase.
Okay.
Um, but I never wanted to be insulated from the views of people I didn't agree with, because I always thought that was unbelievably dangerous. And I'm an Orthodox Jew, and our tradition is about debate. And, I studied Talmud, and we believe in that. We believe that it is godless to insulate yourself from the people you don't agree with. In fact, in the Talmud, there's a story of one of the great rabbis, and he had chavruta. And so in the Jewish tradition, you study Talmud with a partner,
Right.
and your partner is supposed to give you a hard time. And this rabbi's partner died, and he said, "Oh chavruta, oh mituta." He was literally longing for death, because they would bring him new partners and they just couldn't give him a hard enough time. He would say
Wow.
something to them, and they would give him, one rebuttal, and he would be like, "Okay, but what about this?" And then they would be finished, and they just couldn't, that intellectual rigor. So I never gave up on that. I was pretty woke. I really did believe in this mythology, especially around race in America. I'm very glad, thank God, that I got out of that. But I think I was able to get out of it because I never quite, the pleasure of encountering a piece of information that can destroy your whole worldview is, if you lose, it's obviously also a horrible feeling. And if you're on the left, which I was, and you encounter a piece of information like that, you're going to lose all your friends. So it's like a kind of horrifying experience, but it's sort of a sublime experience. And I'll just give you another example that happened to me recently. When I was at the DNC, um, it was the opposite of what I was expecting. And I was expecting it to be incredibly hostile to Jews and incredibly anti-Israel. And they really went out of their way to snub the Palestinian faction. I think they went too far with that. I felt sorry for them. I felt like it was undemocratic how they silenced them. But then they really went out of their way to make American Jews, or rather to make the swing voters who care a lot
Right.
about the well-being of American
Right.
Jews, feel that things are not as bad as we would have expected. And the ability to see that, to see past your expectations and your confirmation bias, it really is, I think, a Jewish value to prefer death to being so caught in your blinkered worldview that you cannot see counter evidence.
That's beautiful. Since you mentioned the Talmud, I would love, whether it be you or anybody else that you know who is a Talmudic expert, there's always these really annoying sort of Jew haters that post all of these out of context and, idiotic Talmudic quotes to demonstrate that no, the real nasty religious edicts are never Islamic. It's really it's the Jews who started this whole thing. So I did mention it. I had gone to my alma mater recently to give two talks. One about the parasitic mind, one of relevance to what we're talking about now on global Jew hatred, and the Chabad rabbi, whom I had become very good friends with. This is at Cornell. I told him the exact same thing that I'm telling you now, which is that somebody should, actually go through the process of having a succinct rebuttal to all that nonsense. Are you familiar with the sort of the memes that I'm talking about? Do you know them on X?
I
Like,
can imagine. I mean, I've sort of encountered them peripherally, but you mean like the stuff where it's like, well, you can get engaged to a 3-year-old girl, but
you could get
only at
engaged to a
this and this
3-year-old
stage,
girl.
and
The the goys are really animals. It's okay to spit on the Christian, whatever. So, and
yeah.
I'm probably more versed in the Talmud than many people, but not versed enough to be able to take each of those quotes and say it is a vertical quote or not. It is taken out of context or not. But it would be great if someone who already comes equipped with all that knowledge to spend an hour or two, pick the top 10 or 20 and just kind of demolish them, to your point about sort of rebuttals, because so many people keep hitting me with that stuff and I just ignore it. I mean, I know it's nonsense, but I don't necessarily have the Talmudic expertise to be able to rebut it. I wonder if that might be, do you think that might be a worthwhile endeavor for someone to do?
you know, one of the things that makes me feel like perhaps there was a real divine intervention in the writing of the original Torah, the Old Testament, the five books of Moses, is the fact that it is so unflattering to the Jews and so unflattering to God. I think it's really the only sort of nation building, God establishing text that is so unflattering to the people who are the chosen people allegedly and their God, right? God does not come off as, some benevolent, he has benevolent aspects, but he comes off as a rageaholic who is petty, who is
Narcissistic.
extremely narcissistic, extremely jealous, right? All of these things I personally relate to very much, and I would not have it any other way. But, as Jews, that's who we are. We are not here to impress anybody else. Our texts are not here to impress others with how liberal we are, right? Happens to be we invented equality before the law. That is mentioned in the Old Testament multiple times, that you may not give preference to a rich person or a poor person, right? For the woke mind, right? We did invent equality before the law, but I don't feel that I am here to impress other people with how, how 21st century impressing the Talmud is. The Talmud is an enormous compendium of a series of intellectual debates and stories that were ongoing, that was cobbled together over the course of 5 centuries. It is the most magnificent text after the Bible itself. And it does not represent the actual law. In fact, Orthodox Jews know you don't open the Talmud to find out how to keep the law, because since the Talmud, there have been another 1,000, 2,000 years of law written since then. So if you pull over any Orthodox Jew, any guy with a yarmulke and a black hat, whatever, and ask them about those lines, they'll say, yeah, those lines are there. Is that what we do? No. Is that what they were doing then? No. They were engaged in an extremely intellectual debate. You know what else they were debating? They were debating how heavy a little bird had to be in order to qualify as a sacrifice before God. They were writing that in the 7th century AD, when you remember that the temple had been destroyed in 70 AD, right? So they were not actually doing that either. They were engaged in a magnificent body of work, creating a body of work to sustain the Jews in exile, to keep them engaged intellectually and spiritually and psychologically and emotionally in the texts, so that they could understand the gap between the written word and the oral tradition. And those anti-Semites, to me, they just don't exist to me. They do not exist. The idea that I should have to explain to them my tradition, I mean, come on. I got nothing to say to you. I don't expect anything from them, and I don't feel that I owe them anything.
Do you feel that since October 7th, you've been exposed to more Jew hatred, if only through, let's say, social media? Because before you answer, I mean, I've seen it all in terms of Jew hatred. I'm from Lebanon. We escaped Lebanon because of Jew hatred. So, few people are going to outrank me in actual lived experience of Jew hatred, by definition. But then, I spend the next 35 plus years being pretty free of Jew hatred. I mean, you'd have the isolated incident where someone speaks to me not knowing that I'm Jewish, before I would have been recognizable, and they might say something that seems like, wow, that was some pretty Jew hating stuff. But, I pretty much lived a Jew hating free life. And then after October 7th, I can't turn in any direction where if it's not the academic progressive left hitting me with stuff, if it's not the Islamic Jew haters, if it's not the you won't replace us neo-Nazi types, I mean, it's coming at me everywhere. So as someone who is in the public eye, have you yourself experienced that?
So first of all, I've experienced more love for being a Jew than ever in my life before, although in
That's nice.
America there's a lot of that. I was Yeah, that for sure. I hear that a lot. People stop me all the time and point to my necklace and say, God bless you. And um, here's what happened. I think that the corners of the universe that were anti-Semitic are now more boldly anti-Semitic. So that includes, exactly like you said, academia. So the progressive left was always on a collision course with anti-Semitism, whether they knew it or not. The Islamic, anti-Semitic movement, the neo-Nazi right. and Canada, apparently. I think that was the most surprising to me. Like thank God in America, the American working class, the average normie American is deeply philo-Semitic. This
Yeah.
is America's the first country in the history of humanity to organize its religion around the protection of Jews rather than attacking Jews and
Right.
oppressing Jews. And that culture runs very deep. I mean, for a long time, it was just Protestant Americans, but then after 1967, Catholic Americans as well sort of jumped on this train. And there was very much this view that Jews must be protected at all costs. And so America is very, very unique in that sense. 80% of Americans back Israel. So when people say it's spreading in America, I think that's absolute nonsense. Like anybody who tells you that anti-Semitism is spreading in America is trying to raise money off of you. It's just not true at all, I don't think. What has happened is that the universities have become much more explicit and comfortable in turning the idea of Zionism into a slur. Now, that is anti-Semitic and bad, but that was always there sort of in potentia, right? That was always sort of a latent aspect of the university culture. I was very shocked to see Canada just totally, the Canadian unions, I mean, just absolutely disgusting. People whose job it is to protect the wages of working class people suddenly staging walkouts over pro-Palestinian nonsense. I mean, so that was very shocking to me. I wasn't shocked to see it erupt in Europe. But I think what we're seeing online is a global audience showing up in the comments of YouTube videos and then steering the audience captured hosts of those channels into a more anti-Israel, anti-Semitic direction. So if you are an independent news outlet who makes your revenue off of YouTube or off of any social media outlet, there's a lot of sort of reading of the comments involved in that and trying to please your audience, and people get very audience captured. And the
Yeah.
thing that people forget is even if the host is American and in America, there are a billion Muslims on this planet who don't live in America who would be very happy to see Israel wiped off the map, and they watch YouTube shows and they comment on them. And I think with someone like Candace Owens, you can really see this. You go
Wow.
into the comment section and it's not Americans anymore. So she's doing really well in terms of the ranking, but who is listening? Americans have no appetite for that. I mean, zero appetite for that. So I think that's really what we're seeing.
So maybe I want to actually mention Candace Owen in a second, but to your sort of optimistic position regarding the non-increase in Jew hatred, I think you might be right when it comes to the general American culture may have not shifted to becoming inherently more anti-Semitic. But I think, as the old maxim says, demography is destiny. So if only because you have more immigrants coming into Canada and the United States and the West in general who hail from Islamic countries where anti-Semitism is baked into the identity of those folks, right? Where you do Pew survey research that shows that in most of those countries, you have 96, 97, 99% of surveyed people exhibiting very nasty anti-Semitic views of the Jew. Then just by sheer numbers, by reality, if you increase the number of people that are, right? So today you have Dearborn and Minneapolis, but tomorrow you'll have a lot more of those pockets. So don't you think that by the sheer fact of the current demographic realities, you have to have an increase in Jew hatred? How could it be otherwise?
I think the answer is no, but again, this could be very Pollyannish. So I mean, you lived it in a way that I really never have, and so I take this with a grain of salt. But I live in a neighborhood that's 50% Russian Jewish immigrants and 50% Turkish immigrants. The idea of there being anything but sort of love between our communities is so far. I wear this big Jewish star. I'll go to the Turkish cafes all the time. They could not be more lovely to me. Now, granted, if you're a Turkish person and you move to America, you probably hate Erdogan. You probably hate the Muslim Brotherhood. You're probably more inclined to like Israel. That's totally fair. But again, going back to my experience at the DNC, so there was this big uncommitted contingent, right? This group of people who said, we're not committing to the Democratic nominee me, we're Democratic delegates. We're not committing until we hear that they're going to do a ceasefire immediately in Gaza. Again, totally their right. This is a democracy. It is their job to use whatever pressure they can to get the policy that they want. I interacted with a lot of those people. I wanted to sort of speak to them, especially as they were making news and it became clear that they were not going to be given a sort of a spot at the DNC stage. One of them, I think one of the leaders maybe was anti-Semitic. Every time he saw me, he was incredibly rude to me, and I saw him being much nicer to other media people. But I spoke to a number of those people. I interviewed them, and they could not have been nicer. I don't see the Middle East the way that they do. They want a ceasefire now. I don't. But I just have people in my life. I met these people, but also I have people in my life that I'm close to who want that and are not anti-Semitic. And so I think it's really important for us who care about civil rights, who care about the Middle East, who care about the survival of the Jewish people, but who are American like me, who care deeply about this country. For me, it is deeply important that I can exist in a collective with people I disagree with about the Middle East. That supersedes that disagreement. As an American, this is incredibly important to me for the survival of this country. And of course, Israel, I think, will be in a much worse position if America's democracy doesn't exist. And now I will not be in a we with someone who's anti-Semitic. I find that to be degrading and undignified. And I refuse, with my personal family history of anti-Semitism and just as a Jew, I refuse to bend the knee to that. But I think that in this situation, we have to have the most capacious understanding and really sympathy for the widest berth of possible opinions that are not my opinion on the Middle East, but are also not anti-Semitic. And to me, it's very easy to do that. I mean, a lot of Jews really feel like if you're an anti-Zionist, you're an anti-Semite. If you want a ceasefire now, you're an anti-Semite. If you're taking Hamas's number that 40,000 people died, you're an anti-Semite. To me, it's like, no, if you hate Jews and want bad things to happen to Jews and are obsessed with Jews and think that Jews are our calamity, you are an anti-Semite. I know people want a ceasefire who are not anti-Semitic. I know people who take Hamas's word for it who are not anti-Semites. They're wrong about all of these things. Down the road, I think if they got their way, Jews would be in trouble, and I'm going to fight them and make sure that they don't get their way. But while I'm fighting them, I'm going to do my best to convince them. That's my job as an American, especially for the people in my life who I love and I really don't agree with on this issue, but I have failed to convince them. And that's on me. I accept that responsibility as an American.
Do within your close circle, whether it be your family, your nuclear family or extended family or close circle of Jewish friends, are most, do they have the same affinity as you, same political positions as you do, or are most going to be the liberal progressive Jew that's going to be voting for the cackler in chief?
The minute you step out of the little MSNBC opinion box, you're going to shed 90% of your liberal friends. They just can't. And if you say anything nice about Trump, you'll have I emerged from that with, maybe 10 very close friends who were progressive. I lost many, many, many. Now it's probably down to 3 or 4, and not because I don't want to still be friends with them. They really cannot abide. It's so crazy how Trump brings this out in people. If you and as an Orthodox Jew, we never had this because the Orthodox Jewish community was always divided on Trump from the beginning. So that means that on Shabbat, at Shabbat meals, you're as likely to end up at a Shabbat table with people who like him as with people who hate him. That's less true now. I think after the Abraham Accords, that was a really big deal for our community. But that we never had that where you say a nice thing about Trump and you're dead to them. They draw a line through your name. So at that point, not through any desire of mine, but I did lose and they're not content to just not return your calls. They have to denounce you on Twitter publicly to let everybody else know that they're not, no longer proximate with you, So there's a lot of that. So I would say now probably more people, but when I talk about how we have to have room in our lives to hear from the Palestinian position, we have to have room in our lives to understand that to ask Palestinians to be Zionists is That's the thing I really can't get past. If you say all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic, you're literally saying that for Palestinians, say what you will about how, you know, their responsibilities for their situation, which I think are large, to demand that they be Zionists to avoid being called bigots. I just think that that's nonsensical. That's not fair. And I don't want to be on the side that's doing not fair thing. So
Right.
when they hear me say that, the people who agree with me, my friends, my family, like I said, they're like, why do you have to say that? Just let it go. Just be the pro-Israel voice, right? But that's not my job. My job is to tell the truth. So
Yeah. Speaking both of Kamala and Trump, since you were mentioning the DNC and now you're talking about Trump at Shabbat dinner. So in the parasitic mind, and I want to pick up on that thought, and I even suggested to you, I hope you don't mind me saying it online, that I'd be happy to write an opinion piece for Newsweek.
sure.
Uh, so I'm going to propose the theory, which I originally discussed in the parasitic mind. I want to see if you think it could be as simple as what I'm suggesting as to why people become intoxicated with the joy and the positive vibes and the goodness and the smile. And the corollary is why they then end up hating Trump so much. So there is a model in psychology of persuasion called the elaboration likelihood model. And the elaboration likelihood model has been used to explain many persuasion techniques. But for example, in advertising, you use it as follows. If I'm trying to sell a hedonic product, let's say perfume, then I want to activate. So there are two routes of persuasion. There's what's called the peripheral route of persuasion and the central route of persuasion. The peripheral route of persuasion is cosmetic stuff, right? It's when you're selling perfume, you're not going to say, here's what 8 Harvard physiologists said about this perfume. You want a sexy girl on a horse with her hair flowing, and you just say mystère, right? Because you are triggering my hedonic drive. And for that, the selling point appeal has to be through the affective route, through the cosmetic route, the peripheral route. On the other hand, if I'm trying to tell you, here are the 8 reasons why you should invest in my mutual fund, then putting a sexy girl on a horse it's not going to sell. I have to show you, here are the returns, right? So I have to activate your cognitive system, right? That's why in the parasitic mind in chapter 2, I talk about thinking versus feeling. It's not that we are one or the other. The challenge is to know when to activate which system, right? So we are an affective animal. We do care about feelings, but when it comes to choosing a president, we should be activating our cognitive system. So now this leads me to, so having given this whole big theoretical framework, why people fall prey to the bullshit of Kamala or why they hate Trump. Thinking is too hard, right? I call people cognitive misers, right? So they need to use some shortcut to be able to make sense of the word. And my emotional system is much quicker to deploy, right? It is a lot less effortful to deploy my affective system than it is to activate my cognitive system. Therefore, if you simply tell me happiness, joy, positive vibes, I'm in. I feel good momentarily. That's good enough for me. So this is actually called the affect as information hypothesis. On the other hand, Trump, if I only activate my affective system, is disgusting. He's grotesque. He speaks in a cantankerous way. So notice that at no point when speaking of Kamala or speaking of Trump that I engage my cognitive system. I didn't say I love Kamala because I respect her monetary policy. I didn't say I hate Trump because I agree or disagree with his whatever immigration policy. And regrettably, Batya, I think that a very, very large portion of the electorate only operates an affective world. And therefore, that explains why so many people at your Shabbat dinner despise ogre Orange Himmler and are infatuated and in love with positive vibe Kamala. What do you think of that whole analysis?
So first of all, you should definitely write this up. It's brilliant.
Thank you.
It's funny. I think it has really annoyed. I mean, just this morning I was at the gym and this guy came over to me who recognized me from the televisions in the gym. He doesn't watch Fox News, but Fox is on one of the 15 TVs. He saw me one morning and he comes over and starts railing against me. And I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to like work out here. Um, but okay, so here's my question to you. Well, how do you persuade people then? Is persuasion just off the table in that model?
It's yes, it's a great question. I mean, you certainly have. So this is going to sound obvious. If you know that people are not going to commit much cognitive effort in choosing, then at least don't give them the reason to despise you for cosmetic reasons. So, when we
Ah,
say that Trump is his worst enemy, yes, it's great that he's a honey badger. And yes, a lot of his personality is what allowed him to break out of the clutter and be able to be who he is. But if you can modulate that so that the people who are in the independent zone, the undecided
mm,
ones, will not have their affective disgust response triggered, then at least you're winning a point or two from those people, right? So even if we give up on the idea that I can convince you through cognitive means, at least don't give people the disgust elicitation. Yeah, because I know a lot of people who, when I engage them, I'll say, just tell me why you hate Trump. And these are supposedly intelligent people with
yeah.
titles after their names. They're called professors. They're morons. They're imbeciles because I say, no, no, give me a specific reason. He's disgusting. He's not presidential. He rubs me the wrong way. And then I keep pushing. No, 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 no. Give me monetary policy.
Mhm.
No, give me specific. They can't. So why don't you, at the very least, now I think, maybe tell me if you agree, it does seem as though Trump has reined that in a bit. Maybe he's gotten older. Do you feel that he's gotten better at not eliciting the disgust response?
So I see it a little differently, which is I think that they are trying to hide from the fact that they are very wealthy. Like the people who
Right.
really, really hate him are also the people who, like you say, have all the credentials after their, like I spent a year interviewing working class people from across the political spectrum for my second book, Second Class. And what I found was like when you talk to Democratic working class people, they don't hate him. I mean, they don't vote for him. Most of the ones who don't vote for him, it's either because they're in a union, and this was before, by the way, the head of the Teamsters union addressed the RNC. So we'll see what happens now. But
Right.
either they were in a union and they couldn't get a meeting with the local Republican because they wouldn't give them at the time of day, and so they vote Democrats, or they had a healthcare issue. And the Democrats really are better on healthcare. Trump doesn't have a healthcare plan yet, although, of course, now with Bobby Kennedy, we'll see what happens there.
Right.
But they didn't hate him. They didn't have that. Where does that hatred come from? To me, again, it's the sort of like how we have toxic masculinity hiding the dispossession of working class men. To me, the open border, let's take that, right? Trump's signature achievement in his first 4 years was he shrank the wealth gap between the top 20% and the working class, the first president to do so in 60 years.
Wow.
People don't know that because
Yeah.
the left doesn't want to give him credit and the free market right doesn't care about the working class. So there's like no one left to talk about this except, poor commies for Trump, Batya, Ungar-Sargon, right? Like, camp of one, right? He shrank the wealth gap between the elites and the working class. And he did that through trade policy that the free market right hated and the left hated because their base is the highly educated elites who love cheap shit from China, right?
Right.
And he did it by closing the border, which immediately raised the wages of working class people because it's the most obvious law of supply and demand. The less you have something, the more expensive it is. The less laborers you have, the more they can ask for, right? So he shrank that wealth gap with very obvious policies. So what's the left supposed to do with that? Well, they could just not give him credit, right? But the truth is that in shrinking that wealth gap, what he reversed was the plunder of the working class by that top 20%, by college professors and journalists and professional managerial class denizens, people who had been making bank in the knowledge industry while their working class neighbors were downwardly mobile. Now, I don't think they realize this. I don't think they realize that the open border put money in their pockets because they were able to hire illegals to do jobs and they didn't have to pay them as much as they would have to pay an American. They don't consciously realize that, but I don't think they could have been so wrong about something so obvious if it wasn't in their economic interests. And so to me, the loathing of Trump, they're not sitting there consciously thinking, I hate him because he gave my cleaning lady more money at the end of the month and it came out of my pocket. But they wouldn't be able to be so wrong about him if they weren't sitting there like the meme, like counting their bucks. You know what I mean? Like I keep saying,
Yeah.
like the Democratic Party is like a plane, and their base, the college educated elites, are in first class.
Right.
And they are happy to pay for everybody to fly for free and coach. But don't you dare try to use our bathroom, right?
Right.
Don't you dare try to come into first class. No, they love paying higher taxes, these people, because they're so rich. And I think at some level they understand they have this guilty conscience, and the higher taxes is a kind of like Catholic indulgence,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Kind of pay people off. Like you can fly for free and coach, but we decide where we're going, right? We have the nice chairs, right? That's kind of the Democratic Party. And what Trump said was, no, actually, it's not going to be like that. And what's another point that's very important to understand is the elites in the top 20%, their populism amounts to sort of railing against billionaires, right? If you ask them, why are working class people downwardly mobile? Why was the high watermark for working class wages 1971? It's been downhill since then until Trump, but they won't admit it. They'll say, well, there has been an upward transfer of wealth, but it's gone to the billionaires. And this is absolute nonsense. If you look at the share of the GDP that's controlled by billionaires today, compare it to 1971, it really has not changed very much. The only thing that's changed is that what used to be the largest share of the GDP in the 70s, which was in the middle class, that has been squeezed up to the top 20%, who now control over 50% of the GDP. So they're really hoarding the American dream is what they're doing. And I think Trump really exposed that. He gave a voice back to the working class. And I think that's why they really can't forgive him, because he's basically a 90s era Democrat. And
Right.
so they cannot forgive him for that.
These are the types of analyses that you cover in your most recent book in Second Class, correct? Right.
Yes.
Maybe we could talk about just the writing process, because I often will get people who write to me, everybody's an aspiring author, right? And well, what's your secret? What's your process? Do you have a particular process that you use when of course you wrote your doctoral dissertation, but beyond that, you have two books. To walk us through any authoring tips that you can offer to some of the aspiring authors that might be listening to this conversation.
Wow, no one has ever asked me that before.
That's why I'm Saad.
I'm a morning person. And I have a day job. I'm the opinion editor of Newsweek. So when I'm writing a book, when I was writing my first book, when I'm writing my second book, I would wake up at 5 a.m. and put in
Wow.
3 hours. I like to go to the gym in the morning also. So then I would go to the gym a little bit later. So I'd work on the book from like 5 to 8 or 5 to 9, then go to the gym and then sit down 10 a.m. having put in that time and do my day job. And then if I'm feeling it in the evening, put in a little bit more work. But if you have even 2 hours a day and you sit down every day, 4 or 5 days a week, and put in those 2 hours, you'll write a book very, very quickly. If you're a night person, set aside 2 hours. Maybe you go to bed at 11. Okay, do 9 to 11, right? Like whatever. For me, I wake up and my brain is ready to go. I have a cup of coffee and then I'm so clear-eyed. So I like to get something done right in that zone. I would, nowadays, I know some people, they always wake up at 5 a.m. They have that 5 a.m. club, and I would join that, except it means that, there are shows like Fox News shows that are like 11 p.m., right? They want to have me on and I want to speak to that audience. And so I can't quite do it consistently. But if I was in the, 6 months where I'm like, I've collected all my data, I'm sitting down to do the writing, just pick 2 hours a day and sit in front of that computer, log off of the internet if you can. If you can't, if it's too distracting. There's a lot of just downtime staring at the screen. Like that's productive time. My first book, when I wrote it, it was like the beginning of the lockdowns.
Let me
I
put it
took out
up.
a notebook.
It's this guy right here.
Yes.
Yes.
Bad news.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there with a pen and a pad, and I was trying to figure out, like, I kind of had a sense that I wanted to write about the class divide. I kind of had a sense that I wanted to write about how Americans are more united than divided, but I tried to sell a book about that and it totally failed. I had a proposal together. I shopped it out. No one would touch it. Got told by editor after editor after editor that basically there's no market for a book about how Americans are more united than divided. So I sat down and I said, okay, well, what is there a market? What is the story I'm trying to tell? What is another way I can tell it? And I just took pages and pages and pages of notes, like whatever came to my mind. And after 3 weeks, I was like, okay, I have another idea of how to reshape this, reformulate this. An editor had said to me, you're telling me we're more united than divided. Then why do I think we're so polarized? Maybe you should write that book. And that's the book that Bad News really is. And I
Right.
sort of, that was sort of how I shifted things. But that's my best advice, I think, is find 2 hours a day, even 1 hour a day where you're devoting it. If you're sitting there, that's a lot of time. 2 hours a day is 10 hours a week. I mean, it doesn't take a long time to write a book. It's just the commitment.
No, I love that answer because I've also answered this question on several occasions, and one of the prescriptions that I offer, although I don't use the temporal metric, I don't say give 3 hours or 2 hours. I usually frame it in terms of word count for a given day. So
Mm,
make sure to write 500 words a day, no matter what. I mean, I could be suffering from bronchitis. I just taught 2 courses at the university. I'm exhausted, but I'm going to get now it in some days you don't hit it, but the average should be that because some days I'm spending 6 hours just reading the literature, and therefore I don't actually produce 500 words. But I do start, okay, today I'm at 12,700 words. Let's see if I can at least put down 500 words. And then, as you said, very quickly, you blink your eyes and, oh, I've got 73,000 words. How did that come about? Which, by the way, that lesson, it seems so obvious, but it exactly applies to weight loss, right? So think of it this way. This idea of persistent discipline, right? So on any given day, based on the decisions that I make that day in terms of calories ingested and exercise expended, only one of three things can happen to my weight. My weight can go up, my weight can stay the same, or my weight can go down. Now, if on every single day I ensure that my weight goes down, even if it's 0.02 of an ounce, but it is always going down. And if I put together a sufficient number of days where that statement holds true, then I will get on the scale and I will go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm 32 pounds down. But now it sounds easy, but the reality is just be consistent, persistent, have grit. Now, of course, you have to have the talent and you have to know how to write and so on. But you're so right. It really is half the battle is the discipline.
yeah. I wish I could say confidently the same thing about weight loss.
Well, I did lose. You may or may not know this, but when COVID started, I went on a weight. I had been historically very, very thin. I used to be a competitive soccer player. Then over the
Oh,
next
wow.
20 years, I kept putting on weight. I got to
Uh-huh.
a weight that was ridiculous. And over COVID, I lost 86 pounds. And it's literally that
Wow.
mechanism of
That's
just
amazing.
thank
Congratulations.
you. But if you had chunked it as 80, no pun intended, as 86 pounds, then it would seem insurmountable. But if you
Right.
frame it, you slice it as I just have to win today, right? And then tomorrow, and then the next day,
Yeah.
suddenly I'm at the right weight and I'm svelte. So you're exactly right. Are there any projects that you're currently working on that you'd like to use this opportunity to promote? Take it away.
Well, I just started a show. I'm co-hosting a show with Michael Moynihan at the Free Press.
Oh,
For
with
now,
Barry Weiss.
yes. It's
Nice.
every Thursday night. We go live at 7, and we would love to see you all there. It's funny because the reason the Free Press really appealed to me is because their viewers and readers are extremely diverse intellectually.
Yes.
I can go on Fox. I love doing it, but you can't really talk to people who disagree with you there. And the liberal shows won't have me on. The channels have like, I'm blacklisted, because I talk about class. You're not allowed to do that there. So, the viewership is so diverse. It's so nice to like people will tell me like, do you realize that like the comments on this are like they hate you? And I'm like, yes, that's great. That's what I want. But anyway, would love to see any of your viewers there as well. We're having a really good time. It was such a good time at the DNC. Spoke to a lot of people that we agree with, that we disagree with. It's really a space for
You
a
just launched
very
this? This was
We
recent?
just launched it.
Okay.
We've done, I think, 4 or 5 episodes at this
Nice.
point. We were live from DNC last week, and we did a couple weeks before that as well. So, but hopefully we'll be ramping up to more frequently throughout the week. And yeah, I'm really enjoying that. It's really exciting.
Fantastic. Actually, I haven't announced this publicly, but I will be appearing on Barry's show. I think the first week of September. I don't know when she'll release it.
Amazing.
So I'm really, really excited for.
Great.
I mean, not only because I support her work, but because precisely for the reason that you said, which is I end up being invited a lot more on one side of the political aisle, where
Yeah.
in reality I'd like to be speaking to the other side so that I
Exactly.
could inoculate their parasitized brains, but they won't have me on. And so, the Bill Maher's and the Barry Weiss's, from a pragmatic, strategic perspective, are indispensable. So that's great. I look forward to catching that. What a pleasure to have you on. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. I'm really, really glad that we finally met, and continued success to you. Thank you so much, Batya.
Thank you so much. God bless you, God. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.